We begin tonight with a trial in New York that has captivated the United States and the global music world. The US rapper and music mogul Sean "Diddy" Combs has been found guilty of 2 counts of transportation of women to engage in prostitution, but not guilty of the most serious charges against him. The transportation convictions carry a maximum sentence of 10 years. They relate to 2 of his former girlfriends. Both testified to having been physically and sexually abused by Combs. The verdict is being seen as a partial victory for both the prosecution and the defense. But in terms of the racketeering charge, on which the prosecution had really gone hard and was the most serious, potentially carrying a life sentence, the jury did not accept the government's case and didn't think that it proved beyond a reasonable doubt that Sean Combs was using his fame and wealth to carry out a criminal enterprise.
Counts 2, 3, 4, and 5, well, those are 2 charges of sex trafficking and 2 charges of transporting people or persons across state lines for purposes of prostitution. Now, in layman's terms, that means bringing 2 of his girlfriends and male sex workers to various places around the country and even internationally for drug-fueled sex marathons that have been referred to during the trial as freak-offs or hotel nights. Now, in the courtroom, there was word of a note handed up from the jury around 4:05 p.m. We saw Combs' lawyers huddling around him.
Well, Arise correspondent Lape Olarinoye has been monitoring all the latest developments, and she joins me now on the line from London. Good to see you, Lape. Just bring us up to date with how things unfolded today in that courtroom in New York as you monitored it.
Well, Charles, as you can imagine, it's of course a much anticipated conclusion of this trial that started last year in September, when, of course, the famous music mogul was charged with those 5 counts, of course, ranging from racketeering to transportation to engage in prostitution, as well as trafficking. Now, we know that just a couple of hours ago, this trial has come to a head amidst a lot of fury and confusion amongst the jury. We know just yesterday one of the jurors described as number 25 was said to have not understood some of the judge's requests. The jury was later encouraged to come to a conclusion and deliberate as quickly as possible, which they did today. And we know that because just over 2 hours ago, we know that the music mogul P. Diddy was actually found not guilty of the very serious charges, which are trafficking and, of course, racketeering or RICO. Those 2 charges, he could have been facing a very long time in prison if he was found guilty. He could have faced life in prison. For the prosecution, this is a huge loss because it's been a long time coming. It's been a very sensitive case where women, including Cassie Ventura, who was his longtime girlfriend, as well as a Jane Doe, came forward to explain and describe somewhat harrowing experience for them. And we, of course, we know that for the defense, although he was found guilty of the lesser charges, overall, this is effectively a win for them because those charges were much more minor to what he could have been found guilty for, which were the hefty racketeering and trafficking charges. Of course, as a result, we're now waiting to hear in the next couple of minutes, actually, whether or not he will be given bail of what the defense have asked the judge for, a bond of $1 million. So that's the next development to look forward to.
Well, thanks for that. And he's been, as you said, found guilty only of transportation for prostitution. Those were the less serious 2 charges in relation to 2 of his former partners, but he was found not guilty of sex trafficking, racketeering, and conspiracy. I mean, for Joe Blogs on the street, it all sounds a bit technical, and I wonder if you can sort of break it down for us.
Yes, it does. I think for the last couple of months, many people who have been engaging with this case and seeing it in the headlines have not really understood the nitty gritty. In fact, for many of us, even those of us who are kind of actively studying in our field of work, have also been very careful about how to kind of define it, just because of the kind of the way the American legal system works. Now, to just get to the nitty gritty, Charles, a RICO charge is effectively racketeering and conspiracy, which means that for the layman, you can relate it to anything to do with like mafia, that kind of a charge, whereby you are taking the movement of people across state lines for your own financial gain and financial benefit, and almost an organized type of crime. Very serious charge. But what we saw play out in the courtroom was the evidence of something much different. And that has, of course, shown in the way in which the jury have deliberated. A lot of the evidence that was put forward was relating to his sexual relationships with his girlfriends and other female company that he had, but none of it was proven to be non-consensual, and so that's why the case has gone in the way it has. In terms of the trafficking, it's the movement of people across state lines for his own financial gain, but the lesser charges are, like I say, prostitution, of transportation, so moving his girlfriends from state to state to have these drug-fueled sexual encounters.
Yeah, well, thanks for breaking that down. So, I mean, as you said, Lape, a partial victory for Sean Combs. I mean, he could have been facing life in prison, but the charges he's found guilty of carry a maximum sentence of up to 10 years each. But we're yet to hear the arguments that will lead to the judge deciding how much of a sentence he's going to get.
That's correct. The sentencing won't happen for some time to come. But actually, from what we know so far, Charles, we know that, like you rightly pointed out, the maximum time that he could face for each of the charges he's been found guilty for is 10 years each. The prosecution have said they're pushing for the maximum, which is the 20 years. It's unlikely that that will happen. A lot of legal reporters, a lot of the people that have been monitoring the case and have been privileged enough to be in the courtroom are throwing numbers out there that he could get anything between 5 to 10 years, or if anything at all. But one thing is certain is that the sentencing will probably run concurrently, which would mean that he would serve that time side by side. So it's very unlikely what the judge will do. So far, we're still waiting for him to get past his next current hurdle as to whether or not he will get this bail that the defense are asking the judge to give him, because he's now no longer a danger, because he has been found not guilty of the more serious charges. Of course, the prosecution aren't very happy about that and are pushing that he stays in prison for the length of time, for the time being until his sentencing happens.
Indeed. And I know you touched on this earlier, but just remind us of the picture that was painted of Sean Combs during this trial. I mean, as the prosecution put it, it was the story of somebody who would hold these freak-off sex parties in which he used male escorts to have sex with his partners, which he filmed and watched. And his defense always said, and I think you mentioned that earlier, that these were consensual sexual encounters, but his former partners said they felt coerced into it. I mean, that's pretty much the backdrop of this, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's very complicated in the language and the description, and whether or not the lines were blurred between consent and non-consent, and that we've seen that play out in court. But what is at the crux of this is, was Mr. Combs actually actively engaging in a form of grooming? Were these ladies forced and, like you said, coerced into doing things that they didn't genuinely want to consent for? And we've seen that with kind of a lot of the evidence that was put forward in a lot of their own accounts. Some women said that even though that they were there, they weren't allowed to leave. We saw that harrowing video months ago of him violently attacking Cassie Ventura and was unable to leave him. A lot of that has come to play in kind of the dynamic and the relationship that he had with his then girlfriends. But actually, for the most part of it, Charles, it was the element of drugs, coercion, movement from place to place, with little or no room for the parties that were involved in this drug-fueled freak-offs, as they're being described. Little or no room for them to say no. And that's why it's been so complicated. That's why the lines have been so blurred. And actually, I think that that's a huge part of the reasons why the prosecution didn't have a strong enough case to prove in court that a lot of this was racketeering, trafficking, and of course, that it was non-consensual.
Absolutely. So an emotional day in court. I mean, bearing in mind that this has been playing out in front of 6 of his children and his mother, who've been in court for much of the trial. I mean, you may have touched on this earlier, but do we know what the reaction has been from Sean Combs and his lawyers to this verdict?
Well, the reactions have been pouring in, Charles, and we know that over the last couple of months, we've been seeing illustrations from the court drawings because cameras, of course, weren't allowed in. But we've been seeing his children go in and out. We've been seeing the court drawings of his reaction. But today, of course, the anticipation of today has been second to none. Crowds of more than hundreds have been gathered outside, including press and content creators and so on, have been gathered outside the court waiting for the verdict. We're told that there's been cheering in the courts that's been relatively quite silent throughout this trial from a lot of his supporters and, of course, a lot of people that wanted him to be charged with the more serious charges. We're also told that he, of course, was very stoic when the verdict was being read out. But after that, he was very emotional. He was constantly praying, apparently, throughout and during and after. He was said to also have been putting up peace signs and prayer signs to the jury, thanking them, I presume, for finding him, of course, not guilty for the more serious charges. He was said to have had a prayer with his family before the verdict. And we've seen pictures of his kids and his mum coming out of the courtroom, all smiles, of course, because this has been, of course, a very interesting moment for them, an insight into a part of their dad's life that they probably really weren't aware of. And so for those involved, like his family, of course, this is a win for them. But actually for those vulnerable women who have been victims of all sorts of things and haven't been able to speak up or have been involved in similar things, this is a huge loss for them. But actually, like I say, for him, at the middle of all of this, he's been quite grateful, and he's shown that in his gestures. Like I said, we've seen from the illustrations and from those who were there.
Lape, I want to thank you very much indeed for your very forensic coverage there. Thank you ever so much. Lape Olarinoye is a RISE correspondent. She was talking to me on the line from London, from where she's been monitoring all the developments emerging out of that courtroom in New York, where Sean Diddy Combs has been found guilty and not guilty of some of the charges against